Welcome back to the Dershow. Before we get to the subject at hand, Kamala Harris and her views on Israel and her pandering to young pro-Hamas people. Before we get to that, two other points. One about Israel. My former colleague, Professor Lawrence Tribe, who's really gone over to the hard left, anti-Israel left, changed his views in order to get admitted to the hard left because he can't get admitted if he says anything positive about Israel, has now speculated that that leak, we know the intelligence leak, excuse me, that about Israel's plans to invade Iran. People are speculating who could have done the leak. Most likely somebody in the current administration who is unfavorable toward Israel, plenty of those, but not according to Tribe. According to Tribe, the leak occurred, and the source of the leak was either Donald Trump or somebody on his behalf. I mean, there is nothing in the world that is wrong, that goes wrong, that Tribe doesn't blame on Trump and his people, or anything in the world that goes right that Trump doesn't credit Harris and Biden and their people. So please, when you hear anything from my former colleague Lawrence Tribe, please take it with a grain of salt. Please understand that he is applying for membership in the hard left, and he was never a member of the hard left. He was never an opponent of Israel. He used to always brag about how his cousins live in Israel. But now, in order to join the hard left, he's prepared to renounce his principles and suggest that Israel is interested in ethnic cleansing of the West Bank, and the suggestion, although he doesn't use the term, is that he's guilty of genocide. We'll get to genocide in a minute, of course, with Kamala Harris, who he is strongly supporting. Before we get to that, an important trial begins today, jury selection in New York City. The same district attorney, Alvin Bragg, who made up a crime to indict Donald Trump, has indicted and is now prosecuting former Marine Daniel Perry. You may remember what happened. He got on the subway. He's a student. I got on the subway, and this other guy, a 30-year-old homeless person named Jordan Neely, started screaming and yelling at people. I'm happy to die. I'm happy to go to jail. I'm going hungry. And he started throwing garbage at people, and the people in the subway got very frightened, and he decided to become a good Samaritan, and he grabbed, and two other guys grabbed this guy. He's black. The guy who he grabbed, Jordan Neely, is black. Daniel Perry is white, but three people grabbed the black homeless guy. One of them was black, and tried to hold him until the police came. Well, tragically, he held him around the neck, and he died. It's reminiscent a little bit of the prior terrible case that George Floyd had caused so much difficulty in. And it also bears a very much of less of a resemblance to the Bernard Guest, the subway vigilante case of some several decades ago. I wrote about that case and taught about it. For years, I've just written an op-ed piece about this case, and I'm watching it very carefully. On balance, I don't think there was enough here to bring a homicide prosecution, and I think that Bragg just capitulated to progressives who want to see an accounting for the death of a homeless black man. But the issue is not that. The issue is whether or not the defendant is guilty of a crime. And so we'll see how that case develops. But let's turn to the subject at hand. This just infuriated me. Kamala Harris is at a town hall or whatever she's doing, and there's a video exchange during a campaign stop at the University of Wisconsin. And she's disrupted by a man wearing Arabic garb, a kiafa, protester who's screaming about genocide and screaming about all the terrible things that Israel was doing. And she says, I know what you're speaking of. I want a ceasefire. I want the hostage deal done. I want the war to end. That's perfectly okay. I think many of us want the war to end. I want it to end with a victory for Israel and the destruction of Hamas, Hezbollah, and if possible Iran, but I want the war to end. And then the guy still keeps screaming as he's being carried out. What about the genocide? What about the genocide, though? The interrupting protester yelled. And this is Harris's response. I respect your right to speak, but I'm speaking right now. Okay, that's okay. I respect your right to speak. The man was removed and the crowd continued to yell. How about the billions of dollars to Israel? He shouted. What about the 19,000 children dead? And you won't call it a genocide? Then here comes her response to this question. You won't call it a genocide. She says, listen to the crowd. Listen, what he's talking about, it's real. It's not what I came to talk about, she said, but it's real. And I respect his voice. Okay. Can you imagine a Klansman coming to an event and yelling, black people are destroying our country. There's black crime is rampant. We ought to start lynching blacks. Can you imagine Harris saying, listen, what he's talking about is real. And I respect his voice. No, she would condemn him in the most uncertain terms. What she should have said, and what everybody should say when it comes to these pro-Hamas demonstrators, these anti-American demonstrators, is I respect your right of free speech just as I respect the right of Nazis and communists and Ku Klux Klan members to speak. But I am appalled by what you're saying. There was an article in yesterday's New York Times by the dean of the Berkeley Law School, a friend of mine, Erwin Chemerinsky, is a great, great dean. And the thesis of his article was, yeah, they have the right to say it, but you have an obligation to condemn it. You have an obligation to condemn it, not to say they're right when they say they want to lynch black people. The same thing is true when people say that Israel is committing genocide. They have the right to say it. They have the right to say it. It's not a matter of context. They have the right to say it. Free speech gives you the right to say all kinds of terrible things. But you have an obligation to condemn it on the merits. I've been doing that now for probably 70 years, since I started defending communists when I was in college, which I hated communists. I always went out of my way to say I hate communism, I hate Stalin. But I defend the rights of communists to make their horrible, outrageous statements. That's what I said when I defended the rights of Nazis to march in Skokie. That's what I said when I defended a Nazi, a young neo-Nazi who was denied admission to the bar because of his ideology. I went out of my way to condemn the ideology. In fact, I was on Good Morning America or the Today Show, one of those shows, and I said I will work for him in court from 9 to 5, but as soon as I leave court, I will go out of my way to condemn everything he's saying. And that's what Kamala Harris should have said. But no, she wouldn't say that because she's afraid she'll lose the votes of radical, anti-American, anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah, pro-terrorist voters in Minnesota. And when I mention it to some of my friends, their answer is, well, she has to get elected. She has to say what she has to say to get elected. You can make that argument about Mussolini and Hitler and communists and anybody else. No, that's not a good argument. You don't say things in order to get elected that are completely wrong. It's exactly the opposite of Donald Trump. Donald Trump will say anything. He'll talk about the size of the penis of a golf star. Why? Because he's been making this statement for years every time he goes into a locker room or a bar. And the subject of golf comes up. I'm sure he says, "Oh yeah, I once saw him taking a shower. Wow, you won't believe it." It's the kind of thing we idiot guys talk about in locker rooms. Trump doesn't understand the difference between the locker room, the courtroom, the legislative hall, or a campaign stop, which millions of people are watching on television. You can credit him for it. You can blame him for it. You know that he says whatever he's thinking, whereas Kamala Harris says whatever she thinks she needs to say in order to get votes. So, that to me is not an argument for Kamala Harris. Oh, she has to get elected. Yeah, she has to get elected. So she should say terrible things about Israel. If she said terrible things about blacks to get elected, by the way, in the South, you had to say terrible things about blacks to get elected. My wife comes from Charleston, South Carolina. I'm fairly familiar with the Jim Crow culture down there. She grew up with segregated bathrooms and segregated schools. In order to get elected, you had to say, whatever you had to say about blacks. No, that's not a justification. You don't have to get elected. You have to tell the truth, and you have to be principled, and you have to say what you actually believe, but you don't have to get elected. That's an option. And you can risk your electoral prospects in order to tell the truth. And that's something Kamala Harris won't do. I don't know what she believes. I'm not even sure I care what she believes. I care what she says and who she's willing to pander to and what lies she's prepared to say. Well, that's real. That's real. No, it's not real. Israel is the victim of genocide on October 7th. We know it because that's what Sinwar said, and that's what Hezbollah said, and that's what's in the charter of Hamas, genocide against the Jewish people. The head of Hezbollah, the guy who was killed in Nasrallah, once said he hopes that all the 13 or 15 million Jews in the world, 0.2% of the world's population, not 2%, 0.2%, a fifth of 1% of the world's population. He hopes they all get ingathered to Israel so they can be taken care of all at once the way the Holocaust took care of them. That's genocide. What Israel is doing, having a ratio of combatant to civilian deaths of 1-to-1, never in the history of warfare has such a good ratio ever been achieved. And let's assume we take all the data that Hamas is stating about Israel, all the data. Let's assume that 42,000 people have been killed. That's nonsense. Let's assume that half of them are children and women, children meaning 19-year-olds with guns, women meaning 40-year-olds with bombs. But let's assume that's all true. Let's assume that's all true, that as many combatants have been killed as non-combatants. That's a 1-to-1 ratio. Let's assume that 20,000 people, innocent civilians, have been killed, children, babies, all that, 20,000. That's much higher than actually occurred. But let's assume that's true. That's 1%. 1% of the population of Gaza. 1 out of every 100. No country fighting a war like this has ever killed fewer people, has ever had a better ratio of civilian to combatant deaths. How dare Kamala Harris say it's right when people accuse Israel of committing genocide? What the United States did in Afghanistan and Iraq and other parts of the world in going after ISIS is roughly comparable to what Israel has done, except Israel's ratios are somewhat better. Most Western democracies have ratios of 4-to-1 or 5-to-1. That is 4 or 5 non-combatants, innocent civilians killed for every combatant killed. In Israel, the ratio is approximately 1-to-1, and nobody disputes that. That's why Hamas never gives out figures dividing up the total number of killed into combatants and non-combatants. They can easily do that. They know they're combatants. They know what percentage, and they say 73 people were killed today. 71 of them were combatants, but they don't ever say that. But when a child is killed, a 19-year-old carrying a gun, they list him as a child. When a woman is killed carrying a bomb, they list her as a woman. And so when Hamas says, 73 people were killed today, half of them were women and children. They don't say how many of them were combatants. Any event, if Israel wanted to commit genocide, they would do a much better job of it. They would be deliberately bombing civilian areas. They're not. They're giving warnings. They're telling civilians to get out of areas that they're about to bomb, because Israel never benefits from a single civilian being killed. Only Hamas benefits from that. And we now have documents from Sinwar in which he insists that more Gazan civilians be killed, that every time a Gazan civilian is killed, it benefits Hamas. So he was arranging things to make sure that civilians in Gaza were killed so that they could attack and criticize Israel for killing civilians. It's part of their plan. I call it the dead baby strategy. Others have called it the CNN strategy. You put babies in the way of where Israel has to bomb because rockets are coming, tunnels are being built. And then you parade the babies in front of CNN, and everybody cries when they see a dead baby, assuming that most of the people fit into that category. A very tiny percentage of the people killed are babies. The vast majority of people killed are adults, most of them combatants. The ones that are not combatants, many of them were the ones who were cheering when they carried these rape victims back on October 7th. You've seen the videotapes. They put these women in the back of trucks, in the back of motorcycles, and people are out there, not Hamas members, ordinary Gazans, the people who people are shedding tears over, the people who Kamala Harris says, it's real, it's real. These innocent people are being killed. These are the innocent people, the people who are cheering Hamas, the people who are supporting them financially, the people who voted for them, the people who helped them hide the hostages. I don't shed tears for Hamas supporters who have been killed in the process of supporting Hamas. Yes, I shed a tear for every baby and child, every innocent, totally innocent person who's killed, whether they be Israeli or Palestinian. But the number of actually completely innocent people of the kind that Kamala Harris wants you to talk about and wants you to think about, the number of actual, totally innocent non-combatants who have been killed are a fraction of what one hears about today from much of the media and from organizations like the United Nations. So, Kamala Harris, you are wrong, and you should be held responsible. You should not be telling these young people you're right. You should not be saying, as you did today in an interview with the Reverend Sharpton, why did you go on an interview with that race-baiting bigot, the Reverend Sharpton, the man who called for a pogrom against the Jewish shop owners in Harlem, the man who espoused violence? Why did you go on his show and be interviewed? And then when you're on his show being interviewed, you talk about how terrible Israel is in Gaza without putting it in context and explaining how this war was foisted upon Israel by Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. I can't vote for you, Kamala Harris. I can't vote for you. I'm sorry. I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat all my life. I'm no longer officially a Democrat, but I can't vote for you. I can't bring myself to vote for you, at least now, based on what I've now seen. I just can't bring myself to pull that lever for somebody who turns to an audience and says to somebody who talks about genocide, you're right, what you're saying is right, or you should be listened to. No, I can't do that. That's just immoral. And I would urge other people to take the same view. You have to ask yourself a question. Can you vote for a candidate who's made statements like that? I can't. I just couldn't. I couldn't go into the booth and live with myself if I pulled the lever for Kamala Harris. I don't know who I'm going to vote for in the end. I don't know what I'm going to do, whether I'm going to vote for Trump, whether I'm going to vote for Nikki Haley, whether I'm not going to vote at all, or whether I'll be persuaded by some events between now and November 5th to hold my nose and vote for Kamala Harris. I don't know the answer to that question. I'm being honest with you now. I don't know how I'm going to vote on November 5th. Right now, I can't vote for anybody. The real question is, do I feel strongly enough to vote against somebody? And I'm going to make that decision probably when I go into the voting booth. So a lot of the questions were about that. And so let's turn to some of these questions. Your vote is a private matter. You don't have to disclose it to anyone. That's absolutely true. I don't have to disclose it to anyone. I have to disclose it to my wife. And she's probably going to take a video of me voting. I vote by absentee ballot. So I actually have to vote before November 5th, probably by November 1st. And she'll know who I'm voting for. And then, Alan, when are you going to announce that you're supporting Trump? Compare Trump's support for Israel and Biden's support, no comparison. I'm not going to make that announcement unless I make that decision. So, I'm in the throes of conflict. It's so easy. If you're a conservative, a right-winger, and you're pro-Israel, of course you vote for Trump. And it's so easy if you're a left-winger and you're anti-Israel. Of course you vote for Biden. But what do you do if you're a centrist, a liberal, somebody who supports a woman's right to choose, who supports gay rights, who supports reasonable transgender rights. What do you? But you're pro-Israel. What do you do? Those are hard decisions, and don't try to simplify them and demean me because I'm still struggling with this decision. It's the hardest electoral decision I ever made. I remember having a hard time back in 1964, my second vote. I voted for John F. Kennedy the first time. And the second time, if I remember correctly, it was Barry Goldwater, who I was very much afraid of. He was, going to drop nuclear bombs, at least according to the ads. And it was Lyndon Johnson, who I had met and who I had heard a lot of things about, and whose character I didn't like. This was really before he had become very active in civil rights. I wasn't sure I could vote. I ultimately did. I voted for Lyndon Johnson, but I did it with some hesitation. Ever since that time, I've never had a problem deciding who to vote for, but I'm having a problem now. Please don't ask Alan to vote for anyone specific. He will do the right thing on election day. I don't know whether I'll do the right thing, but I'll do the thing that seems right to me at the time. I may regret it. I voted for Barack Obama twice. I regret it. I regret the second vote, certainly, because he conned me into voting for him the second time. He called me into the Oval Office and he gave me a story that wasn't true. And I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. Not only did I vote for him, but I supported him publicly. I wish I hadn't. I would have been much happier voting for Mitt Romney. I can't wrap my head around why Jewish people are discriminated against. It's a 2,000-year-old question. We can understand the early history of discrimination, some of which came from churches, some of which came from nationalist politics. Very hard to understand why an American Jew would be discriminated against, but they are in university admissions and job applications in a lot of different ways. All right, here's a positive one. Alan is always positive. He loves arguing, but he is not mean-spirited. Instead, he is fact-driven. I sure hope I'm fact-driven. My book, that little pamphlet that I've told you about before, is coming out in the next couple of days. I think Elon can put it up. The 10 Big Anti-Israel Lies and How to Refute Them with Truth. Yeah. So, I got a very nice letter from the president of a prominent university to whom I sent this. And he said he was particularly impressed with the fact that I'm so interested in searching for truth and trying to have the truth come out in the marketplace of ideas. And that's the purpose of this book. And that's why, if any of you want to help me get this book distributed to 1 million students at 1,000 college campuses, in a subsequent show, I'll give you a website or something that you can write to and tell me how you can help in this project of getting young students to at least see all sides of an issue before they decide on what the truth is. Here's something that's interesting. Sending out a person's email address is not speech. You are asking people to harass that person. Wrong, Alan. Well, I've never suggested anybody send out email. I would be the last person in the world to do that because my email was sent out to people, and I still get traffic reports from Albuquerque, New Mexico, every day on my phone telling me how many crashes there were. So no, I don't believe in sending out people's emails. I do believe in sending out their names and their photographs if they were protesting in public. I think people should be held accountable for their views. I'm not a supporter of anonymous defamation. Okay, this is an interesting one. Wow, I just learned from Alan that I'm a liberal. Remember, I talked about what liberals really are. They're not necessarily people to the left. You can be a conservative and a liberal. Liberal is somebody who supports free speech and a range of other issues that relate to classic liberalism. Wow, I just learned from Alan I'm a liberal. I have stayed far away from liberals, but he's right. Liberals aren't all left-wing loons. So I think it's so important to distinguish between liberals, I am a liberal, and radicals, I'm not a radical, or leftists. I'm not really a leftist. I may lean left on some issues, like a woman's right to choose. But I basically justify that on my libertarian grounds, not on political grounds. If you're a constitutional scholar and you stand for people's rights, why don't you help Steve Bannon? He's a political prisoner. I agree with you. And I have been helping Steve Bannon. I just recently spoke to his lawyer, and I will support him. I think he is a political prisoner. I don't think somebody should go to jail for the allegations that were directed against him. I think if he were the same Steve Bannon on the left, doing exactly the same thing, he would not be in prison today. Okay. Alan, I live in Australia. I'm looking to try and distribute your brochure to universities and Jewish agencies here. How do I get in touch with you? Again, what I'm going to do is going to create a website or something. I'm not technological. My son Elon's going to handle all that, and we'll put it on, and you'll be able to write to me, and you'll be able to tell me what you'd like to do, and I will then give you suggestions about how you can do it to help get this pamphlet circulated to as many open-minded college students as you can. And there are open-minded college students. The loudest ones have shut their minds, including people whose children I know. They've just shut their minds, but there are enough open-minded people. Now, we may have to produce a version of this book with a plain brown envelope cover, so people are not seen walking around college campus with a book entitled The 10 Big Anti-Israel Lies and How to Refute Them with Truth. We actually produced a plain paperback volume when I wrote my book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump, and we distributed it to friends on Martha's Vineyard who wanted to read the book but didn't want to be seen holding a book that said The Case Against Impeaching Trump. So we did what grew out of the old days when people used to walk around with obscene books and used to have a plain brown envelope cover or a plain brown envelope delivering them. So we may have to produce a version of the 10 Big Anti-Israel Lies in a plain brown cover so that people can read it and support distributing it around college campuses without it being known that they're reading one of Alan Dershowitz's books. Oh my God, they definitely should be canceled if they're reading one of Dershowitz's books. So back to Kamala Harris for a minute. She says she's a lawyer. She says she's a prosecutor. She says she's a liberal. She says she's a civil libertarian. If she is, it's so easy. What you do is you do what true civil libertarians do. You condemn the speakers who are calling for Hamas's victory, who are accusing Israel of genocide, who are making false allegations against Israel. You condemn them and then you defend their right to speak. That's the right approach. Kamala Harris, until you understand that and until you follow that, which you won't do, because if you do that, you will lose some of the young radical anti-Israel bigots. But you ought to be willing to lose them in the same way that Donald Trump ought to be willing to lose people who were saying in Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us. He did a better job of that because he actually condemned them and actually said that the neo-Nazis here are no good. But there are good people, fine people on both sides of the debate about monuments. So Donald Trump has actually done a better job of distinguishing between defending somebody's rights and defending whether what they said is right. She said that what they said is right. That's wrong. And therefore, she has lost my vote, at least for now.